What the hell was that? Hey everyone, Templar74 here with another video, and today's video is going to be my review of the latest episode of Sword Art Online Alicization War of Underworld, episode 22, Alice. And I gotta be honest with you guys, this episode probably got the most hate of any War of the Underworld episode so far. I mean, you really can't blame A1 Pictures for this episode because they literally have to fit the rest of the Alicization arc in literally 2 more episodes, so you really can't get mad at them. But the salt this episode got was kind of a shock to me, in my opinion. I am personally indifferent on how they handled what they're getting salt for, which we'll talk about, but this episode was really just a WTF most of the time. But I'll discuss all of this soon enough. So at risk of further rambling though, let's move on to the actual episode. So the episode begins with a press conference hosted by Rinko and starring none other than our friend Alice in the real world here. She's wearing one of the SAO Survivor School uniforms here, which is noticed by the gang who's watching this press conference on TV. And basically this was at Alice's request. She wanted the uniform of the group that helped stop the Underworld invasion. At first she wanted her golden armor, but hey, not even Wrath could afford that. So, you know, you gotta, sometimes you have to make do with your second choice. That's all I'll say on that. So anyway, Alice is giving this press conference here, and the reporters are asking some, what I would call serious questions. A little bit of paranoia in the reporters there. But Alice kind of deflects every single one. And she does it in a very funny way. She doesn't let on that she's upset. She doesn't let on that she's annoyed. She just kind of keeps throwing it right back at the reporter's face here. And I loved it. It was brilliant. It was subtle. It was elegant. Loved that from Alice. And by the way, seeing Alice in the real world was a dream come true for me. I love how she looks in the real world. You really cannot tell that Alice is in a humanoid robot here. I'm just going to say it right now. These robotics are amazing. How far off are we from this technology? I got to ask that right now. How far off are we from this technology? But I digress. Anyway, back to Alice and her press conference here, which is taking up a majority of the episode nonetheless. Yeah, it's not just being watched by the gang, it's also being watched by Higa. And Higa is kind of indifferent on this conference. He's kind of shocked by all the events that have transpired, because also we're hearing of the death of a JSDF official, which was also caused by all of this, and it was none other than Kiku, or Kikikoa. And it's funny because he's like, it's a shame you had to be the only casualty, but it's not really true. Kikikoa is actually quite alive, and he's actually kind of faked his own death, essentially because he knows that the blame would get pinned on him. So he's kind of going down low, incognito, new persona, and he's letting his old self essentially be dead here. And we learned that he kind of had to do this because the raid that was orchestrated by the Americans on Ocean Turtle was not really just the Americans. It turns out that it was the Vice Minister of the Japanese Self-Defense Forces was also involved with the Americans here on this. Basically a bit of military espionage. And so he knew that he was going to take the fall for it, and he figured he's better off dead at this point. So he's going to live kind of incognito and under the grid. However, we learn later on in the episode that his mission is still going to be to protect the Underworld here. So yeah, and it's also interesting to note while this whole thing is going on with Alice, while she's being showed off to the real world, that Kirito and Asuna are still in the accelerated time of the Underworld here. And not for long though, because as Alice is giving this press conference here, she gets a feeling as Kirito's floodlight fluctuates a little bit on Higa's screen. Seeing this, essentially Alice knows that Kirito is about ready to wake up. She excuses herself from the press conference and immediately finds Kirito. And Kirito wakes up, and he basically turns to Higa and demands that his memories of those last 200 years in the accelerated time be deleted. And Higa is kind of, he's hesitant on this request, but he ultimately fulfills it, sort of. And yeah, Kirito comes out of this more unusual than he went in. And what I mean by this is he refers to himself and Her Majesty, the Queen, and he's talking about Asuna. And this is where the episode got probably the most hate online, and A1 Pictures got the most hate. Essentially, the 200 years in the Underworld are going to be a complete mystery to us. All of the Kirito and Asuna moments in the Underworld, what happened in there, those 200 years of accelerated time, are essentially going to be an unknown. And people were very upset by this, but on the other hand, I can kind of see where A1 Pictures, they were in a rock and a hard place because they literally have to fit the rest of Alicization in 2 episodes here. And so, yeah, this is kind of going to be one of those things where you're damned if you do it, you're damned if you don't, and I just hope that A1 Pictures doesn't face more backlash based on what they do with the rest of this series. But again, topic for another day, but that's why this episode got so much hate. Back to that though. So Kirito's memories are essentially wiped and he wakes up in the hospital here, the Defense Force hospital, and he's awakening. Asuna comes to visit him. Their memories have been wiped at these last 200 years, and it's at this time Kikikoa comes in and he visits with Kirito and Asuna in his new persona. And by the way, I like how he looks now. He looks very different. He doesn't look like his old self. Gotta hand it to him. I didn't recognize who it was until Kirito addressed him here. So yeah, I give him props on the new look. I dig it. And Kirito basically pleads with him to protect the Underworld here. He wants to protect what had happened over those last 200 years with him and Asuna. And he basically is told, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. The Japanese government has essentially taken over Ocean Turtle. They've evicted all the people on it. And the survival of the Underworld and the project of Alicization is still highly up in the air. It's being negotiated by the government. And most likely, the project will be disbanded. Wrath will be disbanded. The technology will be handed out to the conglomerates of defense industry here. So yeah, remember the old Eisenhower expression, we must be cautious of the military-industrial complex? That is demonstrated in this episode here. Basically, the military-industrial complex wants the technology from Alicization, they want the Underworld, and the government is trying to fight off all these different factions. The United States is upset, the JSDF is upset, the military-industrial complex is upset. Basically, nobody is happy about this because it's the unknown. And I'm going to quote another anime line here that I loved, and it was from Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains when Yusaku said, "Humans don't like sudden change." It's kind of emphasized in this episode as well. Humans don't like sudden change. They took the initiative by allowing Alice to interact with the real world in hopes that Alice can be kind of the bridge to basically open up people's hearts and minds to artificial intelligence having human rights. Alice is the key to that, and that's also what they're hinging their plans on and their hopes on, is that Alice is able to convince enough of the people that the government will end these basically pointless conversations and they will allow the Underworld to continue on. But essentially, it's up to Alice now. Kirito, however, does not like that uncertainty, and he wants the Underworld protected at all costs. And basically, it's funny, Kiku is like, well, don't worry about it, because my life's work is tied up in the Underworld. I'm not going to let anything happen to it. So, yeah, kind of a loose promise here, but yeah, kind of a subtle and serious moment here, because the Underworld and everything that Kirito worked so hard to protect, everything that has gone on in Ocean Turtle, could really be for naught if this doesn't go right and something goes wrong. And now we move on to arguably the most controversial part of the episode here. I say controversial, not really. It's just one of those things where you're about ready to open Pandora's box. Literally, you have Pandora's box right in front of you, and you're about ready to open it. Should I open it? What's going to happen? That's essentially the last part of this episode that I want to talk about, and that is back with Higa. He's back at his apartment here. They've been booted off the Ocean Turtle, and we learned that Higa did not completely comply with Kirito's request to delete his memories. Instead, what he did was he managed to, behind everybody's back, copy Kirito's Fluctlight, including the memories of the last 200 years. And when he opens the program up, he knows that the artificial Fluctlights don't like being told that they're not human, but he does it anyway. And he has this conversation with Kirito's Fluctlight. And obviously, Kirito's Fluctlight is different from these artificial ones. Basically, Kirito starts asking point-blank questions. Am I the only one? why did you do this? And Higa basically pleads with him, saying, you are the longest living human ever. You are over 200 years old. I could not let this, as a researcher and a curious mind, I could not let this happen. And Kirito basically is like, well, I understand. And then he basically goes on about a promise that he made with Asuna back in the Underworld, where they kind of predicted that this was going to happen. And they vowed that if Asuna was copied alone, she would automatically request that she be deleted. If they both survived, they were going to do whatever they could in their short amount of time to bridge the Underworld and the real world. And now that Kirito is the only survivor, which is revealed to us because Higa did not have time to clone Asuna, he basically vows to fight. He promised Asuna that he would fight to protect the Underworld. And Higa's like, well, what do you mean by that? And Kirito comes up with a solution. And granted, this is his copy of the artificial floodlight here, a copy of him. And he basically says, we need Kaiba's help. We need the soul of Akihiko Kaiba. Moreover, we need a duplicate of the soul of Akihiko Kaiba. And it rings a bell to Higa back on Ocean Turtle about Kaiba, and that Kaiba is still alive. And the Kirito clone basically asks Higa to help him with this. To protect the Underworld, to protect everything we've worked for, I need Kaiba's help. Will you help us? And Higa is kind of hesitant on this because he's like, well, wait a minute. A copy of Kirito's soul. A copy of Kaiba's soul. These two meeting, what would happen? Am I opening Pandora's box? Ultimately, though, Higa, curious about what's going to happen, his scientific and inquisitive mind wants to know. He vows that he will help this copy of Kirito's soul by reuniting it with the copy of Kaiba's soul to help protect the Underworld in case Alice is unsuccessful at bridging the gap between them. And that's essentially where the episode left off. Like I said, this episode was a big WTF in my opinion. This episode got a lot of hate compared to episodes prior, mostly for them basically kind of glossing over those 200 years in the Underworld with Kirito and Asuna. Like I said, you really can't get too angry at them because they're doing the best they can with episode constraints that they have. But at the same time, you know, you kind of got to be a little bit cringe at them if you're a Kirito Asuna fan. However, me, as an Alice fan, don't get me wrong, I'm a Kirito and Asuna fan, don't get me wrong, I ship them. But as an Alice fan above everything, I loved this episode. I thought Alice was great in this episode. I thought that the end of it here with all of these really hard questions, this really big life moment of things are not easy and always you don't make the easiest decisions here. I loved the serious tone of this episode, if you will. I loved it. I thought Alice did a great job. Yeah, seeing Alice in the real world, really good here. So, yeah, overall, though, like I said, I'm kind of cringe at the Kirito Asuna thing, but I'm not going to hold it against the episode because A1 Pictures, they're working with what they got. And they really only have 2 episodes to do this, and they got to try to do everything justice in that time. So, I guess I understand it. But with that all said, everybody, as an episode overall, I give this episode an 8 out of 10. I try not to hold the Kirito Asuna thing over this episode, but I kind of have to at the moment. Like I said, watching the episode, it gave me like a, wait, what's going on? But also at the same time, you know, you as a light novel reader, you kind of got to hold that because there was so much that happened. So it kind of detracts from the episode a little bit. I did not like how we just randomly jumped all over the place there towards the end. I liked the Alice part of it, and that was most of the episode, but after that, we kind of went all over the place a little bit, in my opinion. But maybe next episode will help shift my opinion of this episode. That happens too. But as always, in the comment section down below, let me know what your guys' thoughts were about this week's episode. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you think it was just there? What were your thoughts? Just let me know in the comment section down below, because as always, I enjoy hearing from you. Alright everyone, as always, Templar74 signing off. Have a great day everybody, and I'll talk to you all next time. Goodbye everybody.